Okay. The regular meeting of the City of Oneonta Common Council, here it is November 15th. It's called to order.
Mayor Brennan,
Here.
Councilmember Murphy, Councilmember Davies,
Here.
Councilmember Risberger,
Here.
Councilmember LaParche, here, Councilmember Parsons,
Here.
Councilmember Harrington, Councilmember Radford, Councilmember Butler. Here.
Okay. And join me and pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right. I don't believe we have any public hearings, right? And so with that, if there are any petitioners in the audience, and I'm guessing there may not be. Okay. In that case, we will move along to our environmental board and council member Davies.
Sure thing, Mayor. I was not present, full disclosure, but I did watch the YouTube video and report from that particular perspective. I had to work that evening, so I was not able to be there. The environmental board met November 8th, last Tuesday. And their standing committees all reported in. So let's see, Fred Halfway is ordering trunk guards for many of the new trees that were planted within the city. So those have been ordered and should be put on there soon. They're certainly reviewing and are going to at some point soon suggest some revisions to our code regarding trees, namely in the in terms of language that protects trees, as well as create some guidelines about thinking about trees and tree planting, especially for new development. So we should be seeing those soon. Someone reported on the Deer Task Force. They should be presenting for the Quality of Life Committee November 28th. They have a PowerPoint presentation and a report of sorts to be able to put forward. The creek naming project, if you recall that from last year, kind of stalled a little bit because they were having a hard time finding folks that might be interested in the schools to be able to move this forward. They recalibrated, they've come forward with a new proposal, and now there's quite a bit of buy-in from some teachers. So they're hopeful that they may be able to kind of move that creek naming project forward in the spring and have some proposed names for this body. And someone from the Susquehanna Greenway reported in. They're going to be assessing the bridge and see whether, on New Island, they're assessing the bridge to see whether that bridge can hold pedestrian travel. So they're trying to have DOT, who are the one that closed it, begin to rethink or re-examine whether pedestrian traffic can go on that particular bridge. They're also looking to create a work day to reroute a trail below the dam on New Island. That might have to wait for the spring. And then they are they're looking to create greater trail networks and access around the city. And so I'm not sure if someone's representing that organization is on the Susquehanna Greenway is on the waterfront revival committee. I'm kind of looking at you up to the name, but if maybe we want to reach out to them because we don't have representation there. Because they're thinking about the same things. I think there's a lot of kind of cross. Folks are doing some different things that all are kind of in the same place. So.
Yeah, I think Ed Lorenz is on
good.
Elderberry.
Good. Excellent.
Questions for Mark or comments?
I'm just a little bit more interested on the trees, and you're introducing them more into code. Those type of thought process.
Yeah. So what they're interested in doing, and so we're as I understand it, we're a tree city, and so one of the recommendations is that you go through and that you really codify really tight language about protecting the trees. And also about how you're going to approach trees. So for new development or new roads, things like this. So that thinking about your urban forest is part of your code is one of the recommendations. So they've been looking it over. The environmental board been looking it over, making playing with some language, and they're going to be bringing that forward to try to have some conversations about how we might codify more deeply in our code protection of the trees as well as thinking about trees and new projects. And that's about all I know. Right, you don't want to know?
No, I know they reached out to Chris, but I'm meeting sometime to talk with them. We haven't had any conversations with them yet.
Okay. No further questions, comments? All right, thank you very much. Moving on to the Housing Commission and Councilmember.
So I, excuse me, I was present at the Housing Commission meeting last Wednesday, and I'm very sorry because I rushed over here and I didn't grab my laptop in which I wrote all my detailed notes. However, I will give you a brief overview. It was kind of pretty status quo as far as just there's an ongoing discussion within each of the committees. Steve Yearly and Judy Pagman were both in attendance, and they kind of gave some discussion about the smart growth committee in particular was kind of interested in how maybe they could help foster applying for grants or and different kind of funding opportunities. So there was some good conversation there, but really I apologize that I don't have my notes here, but you know, things are just kind of moving along and discussion is being had, and there will soon be a website up that will have a hub of gathered information for everybody to have, and the mayor has an intern working on developing that so that it will be like a good place that houses all of this content plus all the regular meetings for each of these sub ad hoc groups. So that's what I have to report.
Any questions for Emily on what was reported?
Would you like to? Add something?
Yeah, I'm just going back through my memory banks of
I know.
things that were discussed. I know the refugee committee, they had determined that they were going to hold off until they had a number of folks, if I recall, that they were looking at
Right, so they're working with an agency out of Utica, and so to get families in, usually there's like a lot of social work that needs to be involved. And so they want to find a family that has kind of been established here for over 90 days, because then it doesn't really require that amount of brokerage. So that's what they're looking for now, and it's one family to start is what my overview was with that.
Yeah, and I'm going around, I gotta tell you, without notes in front of me, I'm in the same place you are. There was a lot of discussion.
There was a lot of discussion, I know, I walked in and I was just like, oh. Yeah,
We'll reconnect on it.
okay,
That's probably the better bet.
I
There was a lot of dialogue, and there, I mean, with 5 active work groups among the 7 with things to report. So we'll come back to it.
okay, I mean, I'm happy to bring it, you know, to our next council meeting, and yeah.
I was gonna suggest putting it on the agenda at the next meeting.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate, because they, you know, they have stuff that they want to put out there, obviously. Yes, clearly, you know, I'm interested in what's going on with that, so very good, all right, so,
Okay,
all right, no worries. We'll move on to finance and human resources.
Dave, can you?
Sorry,
I wrote it all out, so.
Dave, of course.
Sure. Legislative committee met on November 7th. We had 4 topics for discussion. First one was regarding the R3 high density residential district zoning. This is a discussion about extending short-term rentals into the R3 zone, which is typically the apartment building areas within the city. And this is to potentially shift where the summer rentals occur. This would also allow Hillside Commons and other apartment complexes to participate in the short-term rental. University zones or U zones, such as Harvard City, can already do whatever they want to because they're U zones, so they can take advantage of this. The concern that was brought up was the question would be, would this lead to a decrease in available apartments within apartment complexes within R3 zones, such as Wilbur Park Apartments, due to more lucrative short-term rentals? A solution that was discussed was to potentially rezone Hillside Commons to part of the U zone. The only downside to that is that it would affect another apartment building complex that's right next door to it, and possibly some single family homes in the area. So we kind of left that without any solution on what we wanted to do, because there's a lot of questions. regarding that. The second item was section 444A, historic property exemption. This would decrease the tax obligation of property owners on projects regarding restoration. So they wouldn't be taxed immediately on the improvement for 9 years. So what happens over 9 years, it's a slow step up of increasing taxes until year 10, where there's no exemptions anymore. This works with a certified local government status legislation, so you can't use this exemption locally without the CLG approval process. Also, the property needs to be within a locally designated historic district, which is established by the CLG. So the action item for this was Stephen was going to be contacting Mr. Herzig for further information and to develop a motion. Because the third thing we talked about was certified local government status. And we have, I think you all have received, I think was it this? Yes, everybody received this, copy of this. The chapter 160 historic preservation. This is approved by SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office. We have to resend the legislation back to SHPO just to make sure that it's fully updated before we vote on adopting it, I believe, because they haven't seen it in over a year, and there may be some changes. But essentially, the chapter 160 establishes an architectural review board that operates outside of the ZBA. Now, of course, the rumor that always flies around is that the architectural review board regulates things like paint color that homeowners can use, but this is false. This is something that I've heard for years that happens. But what typically happens is before a project would be done on a historic property within a locally designated historic district established by the CLG, the project would go in front of the architectural review board and then travel to either the ZBA or the planning commission for final approval of whatever project that they're doing. So, so that item, I didn't write what the action item was on that. I don't think we're that on for discussion for later. Okay, so we can discuss that later. And then the last item was exterior maintenance code, which we did not get to, so we tabled it for the next meeting. Sorry.
Well, I appreciate that very much. Okay, do we have any questions?
So Dave, is this part of the certified local government?
Yes,
Or we're gonna discuss this later?
yes. The other motion that would be coming forward later is the exemption. But we have to, if in order to use that exemption, you would have to have a certified local government status, which is what this is. So. And what the reason why we started talking about this is because we have a historic district, we have two historic districts. Or is it just one big one? Just one. But there's limitations to that. We've discovered over the last few years, there's not a lot of teeth to having that to either preventing things from happening or for assisting homeowners in maintaining that historic property. So having a certified local government status would do that, would do both of those things for people. So
I just have a couple of questions. We'll wait until we get into the discussion. Okay, very good.
Any other questions outside of those on this?
I did. So Dave, you guys talked about R3 with our temporary rental status. Was there any other zones that you guys talked about, or just strictly R3?
it was R3 only.
Okay. Has there been any discussion previously, maybe looking at other zones, and maybe limiting how much activity could be done within a zone?
This is the first this was brought up. So this was actually brought forward by Stephen. And I think the reasoning was to allow apartment complexes to potentially benefit from the short-term rentals. I think mainly it would be fair to say would be Hillside Commons because they're empty in the summer.
Right.
But then, so we were going back and forth about it, or I was anyway. Luke wasn't here, so it's just John and myself, and I just had some concerns about how do we regulate it enough, like, I'm not against this necessarily, but how do we make it so we don't have a negative impact on other apartment buildings and the housing, the limited housing that we have right now, and I just wasn't sure what the solution was, so there were little solutions that we're talking around, but I wasn't sure what would be a good solution, so we decided we should bring it here for discussion. So,
I just know that I don't know if anybody else has been hit up about it, but in the other zones, people have asked about the short-term rental. Opening of, and I'm sure our first thought might be beyond allowing somebody to garnish a little extra revenue would be how much we would limit that, because it would have an effect, positive and negative, within a neighborhood. But also we don't want to restrict people from maybe having an opportunity to rent out their home on a short-term basis.
Well, there isn't, I'm sorry for this speak. There is, a local ordinance about short-term rental for your primary residence. So, you know, if you were going away for 2 weeks and you wanted to rent your home in that interim, you'd be able to do that. It's just with regard to like corporations or, additional income properties that is restricted.
But I think that's also restricted to particular zones. I don't think that's citywide.
Pretty sure it's citywide. I mean, we could.
Is it citywide?
2 weeks,
2 weeks, that's it.
anybody can rent it.
No, but didn't we pass legislation about renting your, and as long as it's your primary residence?
Yes, you did.
I think you're right. I just thought it was down to 1 or 2 zones. Because I know there's a family in Fifth where they did that once we passed that legislation 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, but.
I thought it was changed to, as long as it's your primary residence,
It's city,
is that limited?
Yeah.
One thing here is, I believe this item is also up for the discussion agenda later on, that under U zone, so we have to continue this later, so we have to continue on.
No, thank you.
I'll
I would have.
I'll agree.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments that are not actually going to be addressed in discussion later on? No, so thank you very much. All right, moving on to our Finance and Human Resources Committee report. When?
and Mayor, we met November 7th. All committee members were present. We were updated on the planning development consultant RFP. And the Restore New York intent to apply, which is November 30th, according to my notes. Before you was agenda C for us, which was the use of prime proceeds reserves for a evidence cold storage unit. Greg and he updated us on the biosolids bid award, which is also for you. Went over. And I think after that one, executive session. Yep. And we did give an update on the grants for water. Primarily, we're zoning for Central Terrace, Overlook and College. And we're on the intended list. We're waiting for the bill or BIL and the WIIA grant program. So we're still waiting on that, but Judy did update us on that. So hopefully soon we'll get some word. Greg, we're still looking at, is it $2 million? Around there,
Roughly for that project. That project includes. This we mentioned it on some overlook at College Terrace also is lumped in with the water tank that's on the west end. Right.
which is a 1 million gallon tank, right? Are we upgrading that?
It's 500,000. Roughly 500,000.
That was it.
Questions, comments? All right, thank you very much. Moving on to our city administrator's report.
There. I believe it shared on social media earlier this week, firefighter Jonathan Good, a newest firefighter, graduated from the State Academy of Fire Science November 10th. He went through a 15-week training period. Did an excellent job there and actually received the Professionalism Award for display of outstanding professionalism throughout his time. So congratulations to John, and we'll be seeing him around and welcome him to the fire department. Several student volunteers from SUNY Oneonta Biology Club will be cleaning up litter and debris of Blue Island this Saturday. They coordinated that with Chris and BW and Chris and LBB, and we'll be leaving a roll off and them to use and pick it up after the weekend. So that was a nice thing that they reached out and organized. Sidewalk was poured today on Duane Street, as well as some other miscellaneous repairs that still will be done throughout the city. We have about 96, almost 100 pedestrian crosswalks were painted throughout the city. That work is done now for the fall. Rock Street storm line installation should be completed tomorrow. Our hazardous tree contractor had a bit of a delay. They're supposed to start tomorrow. And, several employment opportunities are out there now. We have buildings and grounds maintenance worker we're seeking, also a water plant operator, chief water treatment plant operator. Our chief operator, Stan Schaefer, will retire at the end of this year and transition to part-time. So very successor. Part-time bus drivers, of course, finance director looking to transition to a new finance director eventually. Janie's not retiring anytime soon necessarily, but we talked about a transition, and we can find the right person and make that transition smooth one and be ideal. That civil service exam is scheduled for January 28th, 2023. Also scheduled that day is civil service exam for accountants. So we're also advertising for that position. And in addition, we're advertising for deputy finance director. So ultimately, we have 2 vacancies, or a vacancy and anticipated vacancy to potentially fill. Any questions, folks?
Yes. Leaf pickup, we're getting snow tonight. And I know there's a lot of leaf bags still in my ward, anyway, I'm sure there's leaf bags everywhere. We're still gonna continue that all through the week. Okay, and sidewalks, are we finished with sidewalks?
No, there's a little bit more to be done. We're not gonna be able to get Elm Street.
I knew about Elm Street, but I know
The
those,
miscellaneous ones, I'm not sure what they finished today, but there's some left.
I believe the 2 on Normal Ave, the holes are still there.
They should be coming back to finish.
Okay, all right. Because we get a lot of foot traffic on Normal Ave, and I've already seen one.
We have miscellaneous sidewalk repairs throughout the city that still have to be done.
Okay.
About 1 more day worth of work.
Okay, and you'll pull up the stakes on that Elm Street
Yes.
sidewalk area? Okay, all right, thanks.
All right, real quickly, I know you mentioned it last meeting, but the repainting of different lines, different crosswalks, I know that took place. How'd they do in terms of number of crosswalks? I mean, or maybe better asked, how many do we have left and where are we at with that?
They got about 100, but we have 400 or 500 total. So there's quite a few that we might get.
Did they hit anything like, for example, I've had a constituent ask about the one-way on Jaeger Avenue, kind of where it tees into to Center Street there, that they wanted one-way arrows, were things like that hit or no?
I think we only got crosswalks in this round. I can get a list from John.
Only crosswalks with some stop bars.
Okay,
Yeah. If that's helpful, I think I said I would last time. I said what was actually done for the whole council.
That'd be great. Yeah, thanks.
yes, if you've got it, that'd be great. Thanks, Greg. Chris.
Greg, kind of along the line of current ways, we were running a dumpster. Earlier this year, we still doing that, if we are, where's it located, because.
You mean down at the.
Yeah, down on the
site. I think we discontinued it.
We discontinued it. We had contractors stopping in on the weekend and dumping material outside the dumpster and leaving quite a mess for us to pick up on Mondays. So to eliminate that problem, we eliminated the dumpsters.
Can I ask a question that I maybe should know the answer to? know that you have been considering a new gate system. Was that left out of the 2023 budget?
We had it in the original budget, but we had to cut it.
Okay,
For the greenways.
Yes.
I mean, people don't like taking that boat anchor down.
Anything else? Okay. All right, and for me, so a month ago, I read a proclamation of the city's advocacy for Operation Green Light in honor and support of our veterans. And the effort saw some traction in the neighborhoods throughout the city with homes and businesses displaying their green lights and windows and front porches. But I want to call your attention to these images that were taken outside on the campus of SUNY Oneonta. These are windows, the windows of individual dorms. And I was moved by that. I really was. It was a reminder that our college students are, if they can be as engaged in the efforts and concerns of the community as any longtime resident in the city. Their support of Operation Greenlight gave me a warm feeling, and I just want to take the opportunity to share it with you guys tonight. I look at these lights as a beacon and a signal, not just to our veterans, but to the community at large. Our students are half our population, and we are blessed to have them. I inform them at every opportunity that I get. They are Oneontans. And their citizenship, these 4 years and hopefully longer, gives me, and I hope you guys, another reason to be optimistic about our future. Thank you. So on another note, I don't believe we had the opportunity, as we last met on November 1st, to congratulate the Oneonta High School boys cross country team on winning the sectionals. That happened a couple of days after our last meeting, November 3rd, I think it was, something like that. So from all of us in the city, congratulations to the boys. And finally, again, I want to recognize SUNY Oneonta. They have multiple athletic programs advancing through the NCAA championships right now. The men's soccer team has made it to the Sweet 16, the NCAA D3 soccer tournament. And Megan Francoeur, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, finished 7th out of 166 runners at the NCAA cross country regionals meet this past weekend. And with finish, she automatically qualified for the NCAA championship race that will take place in East Lansing, Michigan at 11 o'clock this upcoming Saturday. So go Megan. And go OHS and Hardwick and SUNY teams, and so to the community. If you can take in a game and show your support, it is always appreciated. I can guarantee you'll have a good time. So that is it for me, and we'll move on to our consent agenda.
Good, Mayor.
Yes.
One thing I should add to the cross-country item that was not reported in the paper is Simone Schumann, who was the Oneonta girl runner that went to the state meet with the boys. She qualified for the federation meet, which is kind of like, it's a mix of the state meet and New York City schools. And they meet in Wappingers Falls this upcoming weekend. So it's kind of like the super state meet.
How great is that?
And the next step after that would be regionals for the leading to the national mix. So. Yeah.
It's a lot of positive and way. That's great. Thank you very much for that. All right, moving on to the consent agenda. Motion number 1. That the Common Council approves the minutes of the regular meeting held November 1st, 2022. Motion number 2. That the Common Council approves the warrants totaling $283,479.90, and that the same be placed on the Director of Finance's desk for payment as presented. Number 3, motion that the Common Council authorizes the use of the crime proceeds reserved in the amount of $7,500 to fund an evidence cold storage unit for the police department, and further authorizes the necessary budget amendment. Number 4, motion that the Common Council approves the purchasing agent's recommendation to award the bid for the 2023 biosolids hauling to the lowest response bidder, New England Waste Service of ME Incorporated, a wholly owned subsidiary of Casella Waste Systems, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, at a rate of $125 per ton for landfill disposal, and when permits and approvals are available, the alternate bid for beneficial disposal at a rate of $110 per ton, with an optional 1-year extension for 2024 with a price increase per the bid. And motion number 5, that the common council authorizes the mayor to execute a memorandum of agreement between the city and the Oneonta Professional Firefighters Local 2408 IAFF to adjust employee number 24237's salary to reflect the employee's prior service and address other negotiated benefits. Motion number 6, that the common council authorizes the mayor to sign a supplemental settlement agreement with employee 16002 effective November 15th, 2022. Motion number 7, that the common council approves the city administrator's appointment of Nancy Ella Powell, the position of transit coordinator at a base salary of $41,577, CSEA grade 11, effective November 16, 2022. This appointment is subject to the satisfaction of all civil service requirements. And finally, motion number 8, that the common council appoints the following city residents to a redistricting commission to evaluate the existing ward boundaries for equity and representation in relation to population and to propose a plan to the common council in compliance with the municipal home rule law within 6 months of appointment. Representing the first ward, David Hayes. Representing the second ward, Susan Lettuce. The third, Lori Zimnowitz. Fourth, Gary Herzig will also chair the committee. From the fifth ward, Jim Foote. From the sixth, Bill Shue, Len Pichardo from the seventh, and Sean Brunswick representing the eighth. And with that, anybody looking to move out? Go ahead, motion to approve, sorry. No, you're looking to move something out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Eight, okay. And any others to be moved out? Okay, do we have a motion to approve? Len, followed by Mark Davies, and we'll call roll.
Councilmember Murphy,
Aye.
Councilmember Davies.
Yeah.
Councilmember Richburger,
Yes.
Councilmember LaCarty Shu. Aye. Councilmember Carson,
Yes.
Councilmember Falco. Yes.
All right. So now,
They pulled my
Council-
attention.
member of the party issue, you have.
I did, yeah, I'm just
You
gonna.
issue?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you. And do we have a second?
I'll second.
Mark and Katie.
I'm just gonna say.
Okay.
May I say something?
Yes, you
Oh,
may.
that'd be lovely.
I just wanted to thank everybody. I reached out to David Hayes, and this is a chore for sure. But I really appreciate all 8 of these individuals stepping up and helping us make sure that we're fairly and accurately representing the city. To all of those listening, hopefully you can hear me. But just know that the council really appreciates it.
Okay. Any further discussion? All right, with that then, we'll call the roll.
Councilmember Murphy.
Aye.
Councilmember Davies.
Yes.
Councilmember Richburger,
Yes.
Councilmember LaCarty Shu. Abstain. Councilmember Carson.
Yeah.
Councilmember Falco.
Aye.
Move on.
I'm sure her last name was on that list.
Get that.
I'll let-
All right. Moving on to the discussion agenda, certified local government. Yes.
Yeah, I'm really relieved to see Stephen on the Zoom, because I think that Dave kind of spoke to some of the concerns that we'll generally hear from our constituents about this. It's something that I am really excited about to see movement on. And I think that, you know, in asking people to look at this and say, like, what are your concerns? You know, I think folks are worried about micromanaging their property. I think they're worried about generally being able to afford the nature of the renovations that might be required of them. And so I was hoping that we could ask Stephen to speak to some of the safeguards that are in the legislation with regard to, you know, making it a reasonable piece of legislation that is going to, how is it going to benefit, you know, residents and, you know, maybe assuage some of those concerns? You know, I think that's appropriate.
Well, given that we don't ask you.
Oh, I thought he was on.
I would take a look.
the-
Even understands this legislation, but
No,
knows very, very well, much better than I do, so.
Yeah. What did you say?
Well, be there.
So overall, are they making recommendations or do they have authority?
They have authority,
Mhm.
but what they do, and if you look at any older community, like. Was it Saratoga, Cooperstown, obviously, but there's lots of other communities throughout New York State that have these. And it helps protect the historical nature of that community. So we've had a lot of issues. You're not gonna have an issue where you've got a property, a historic property, and let's say an outside railing of the porch has rotted away and it's gonna be replaced with a 2x4. Because that meets code. That won't be allowed.
Mhm.
So you've got to make it fit with the nature of the home. But on the other side, the good thing is that there's usually funding available
Mhm.
to help the homeowner maintain the property too.
And there's also, I noticed in here, the body would have the discretion to, and this is the same at like ZBA, I think you can prove like an economic hardship. So if all you could afford was a 2x4, there's some leeway there. But for example, you know, if you own multiple properties, for example, and it's an income property or whatever, you know, you're gonna have a harder time kind of proving that case. To be able to get away with the substandard.
Is Stephen
Repair.
available?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Okay, there he is.
So I'm on page 3 and number 1, and I think number 8 was saying that they make recommendations. It's just, Steve, can you just fill us in a little bit more that this is not an independent body that?
It is an independent body. They don't provide recommendations. It's just like the zoning board of appeals. They issue certificates of appropriateness that are required to, they're binding. It's a binding ordinance, just like any other determination made by the planning commission or the zoning board of appeals. It's not a zoning ordinance, so the zoning board of appeals is not an appeals body for it. You would have to file an Article 78. Yeah, I mean, so it's an architectural review board. To kind of speak to the people or communities that have it, Oneonta is definitely like, we're kind of the lone, I mean, we're one of the few communities that does not have an ordinance like this. Albany has an ordinance like this, Schenectady has an ordinance like this, Cooperstown, Saratoga Springs. I mean, Oneonta is on the outside of communities in New York as far as historic preservation ordinances are concerned. So yeah, I mean, it's in our comprehensive plan. It's been in our comprehensive plan since 2019 when it was updated. So this was something that the community identified as something that they wanted completed. And that's why this legislation is here.
Len, I see what you were seeing. They provide recommendations to the council for further legislation that would help with historic preservation. Or it says here concerning the acquisition of preservation easements or other interests in real property. But they'll direct this body the architectural review board will deal directly with residents of the city with projects that if they lie within a certain area of the city that's been, or what did I put it here?
Yeah, because that was one of my other questions, Dave, because I'm not familiar, and when you guys asked at the beginning, I thought that was of interest, that we're not sure what is the historic preservation district?
Well,
Who's included in that?
there's
The architectural review board established local historic district districts, they typically overlap the national historic districts. So that would be Main Street and Walnut Street Historic District. So more than likely, this board would establish local districts, and those districts would fall under this ordinance.
So presumably like the sixth ward is a historic significance to the city. So I would guess that would be.
Well, that's also the study that's being done right now, that's supposed to be recorded, I think, next month. Recommending where we would have other historic districts. But I would assume that those recommendations, if we pass this and we establish an architectural review board. Those recommendations would go to that body to decide, okay, do we want to include that in our local historic districts down the road?
Yeah, that body would be recommending new national district nominations. They would take the information we're getting from Otsego 2000 and moving those towards national districts, recommending new local districts like that. They would essentially take over the function of doing historic preservation, public outreach about tax credits. It would open up individuals in those districts to be eligible for that 444A local tax credit or local tax exemption on improvements. They would be kind of spearheading all of those financial incentive programs.
So Steve, how would this look for a homeowner that wants to get to energy efficient windows and doors? And I'm kind of zoned in on page 14, number 4, and it says maintenance and repair shall be limited to in-kind repair and replacement with material that matches the historic material and type, design, dimension, texture, detailing, and exterior appearance. So would we be allowing, with this separate body, allow the homeowner to use energy efficient materials?
Yeah, I mean, there are products that are made that SHPO approves for that. I mean, Springbrook is using those right now to replace window on the Ford building, the Ford block building. So those products exist. It would be up to their discretion to approve products and review products that the homeowner picked to replace windows with.
Okay. I didn't know that Springbrook.
For example, what?
I didn't know that Springbrook had moved forward on the replacement of the windows. I thought that they had stayed with the glass that's there because of cost.
So the original product that they brought to us that was approved in the planning commission was reviewed by SHPO. So they had windows that were approved through SHPO when their site plan project was, or when their site plan was approved.
Okay. So I just for recap, so you are saying that a homeowner will be allowed to use energy efficient material moving forward?
What I'm saying is that board would have the discretion to review a product that a homeowner brought to them as part of a window replacement. And that those products do in fact exist.
Further discussion? I think we also need to keep in mind, if we pass this, doesn't mean that the entire city is suddenly gonna have to go under an architectural review board. But there may be sections of the city that would. But I think if we really wanna, we talk about wanting to preserve our history. I think this really allows that to happen.
It does provide a community stream as well.
Yes, yes.
But we won't fully know where those areas are until this body is formed. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, what's the body is, if we pass this and we have an architectural review board put in place. They will have the ability to then establish different historic districts, local historic districts that would come under their purview. When they, Stephen, if an architectural review board wants to establish a historic district, does that come before the common council for approval?
So the most obvious and the most advised method for that is that they nominate local districts that are already recognized as national districts. That's the model. So it's easy to show where those areas would be because they're already outlined. We already have a map showing where the national districts are.
So let's say we get recommendations for further national historic districts in the very near future. How does that happen? Is that something that the council has to approve?
Yeah, so typically the council would be making those, they would be approving either the CLG board is recommending to the council for the approval, or they're just simply nominating places that already exist as national registered districts.
Okay, gotcha. All right.
And then there's flexibility in that ordinance to adjust that. I mean, the ordinance that's in front of you is the one that SHPO's approved. There's ways you can move the ordinance to where the only thing that the architectural review board is reviewing is parts of a property you can see from the public right of way. You can make the ordinance so that the the commission is designating districts, that they're recommending the council to designate districts. I mean, there's flexibility within the ordinance. That particular version of the ordinance has them reviewing any exterior changes. And I believe it has the council approving the actual final boundaries for the local historic districts.
Stephen, would this have a direct effect on the ownership, the city's ownership of 27 Market Street?
The city would fall under its own review, so yes, we would have to follow our own ordinance. I mean, that is part of this ordinance, is we would have to show financial hardship to demolish that building.
Okay. Is there any other properties that we should take a look at then?
I mean, we own the Armory, I guess. We own,
Right.
City Hall. Like, I mean, those would fall under, well, theoretically, those would fall under this ordinance. So any improvements with those properties would be subject to the review process.
Okay.
Further discussion? We're done. This one.
Actually, I have one more question.
Yes, go ahead.
So Stephen, am I correct, or actually, tell me the correct procedure here. Can we approve this chapter 160, or does this have to go back to SHPO first before we would ever have a vote on it?
So SHPO, before the city council met, I contacted SHPO and they were comfortable with the ordinance as it is currently. They had previously approved it almost a year ago.
Okay.
All right. So
Just full disclosure, I haven't had time.
no, that's
to read this
fine.
stuff.
That's fine. So let me get a sense of what the council's direction is on this, even, taking into consideration, no one's really had an opportunity to fully review this. Is it something that we want to have further discussion on the other side of that review at our next scheduled council meeting, or do we want to move to some other action?
Obviously, I think we need more time to review it. What I would recommend is we put the motion on the next agenda, and that way we can have a proper discussion. And then if we feel like we need more time after that, we can table it. But, I would recommend it goes on the agenda, but,
We all have agreement on that? Sound good? Good,
Yeah.
all right, very good. That's what we'll do. We'll move it to the next council agenda as a motion, and we'll have that discussion. Continuing our discussions, and Steve, don't go anywhere. We want to talk about now this modification to the U zone. And I'll let everyone begin that discussion. Anybody have Dave, you were the one, in your report from the legislative that was more well versed in concerns and the arguments going forward.
yeah, even though this says a modification to the U zone, I feel like that was half of the topic that we're discussing. So just as a reminder, this was allowing short-term rentals into the R3 zone, which would include the high density residences like the apartment complexes and the downside to that, if there was a downside, was we weren't sure, or I wasn't sure what would happen with other apartments, not so much Hillside Commons, but other apartments that currently rent to families, if they would suddenly see a decrease in what the availability to families in order to open up some apartments to the more lucrative short-term rentals. But with that, a possible solution that was brought up was the rezoning Hillside Commons to a U zone, which would allow them to do the short-term rentals and forget about the R3 zone. But the downside to that was there's an apartment complex within that zone, or there would be an apartment complex within that zone. And there's a few single-family homes in that area as well. So,
Steve, can we have you weigh in on?
Yeah, so first, I kind of want to correct what was being said earlier. You can do short-term rental as an owner, as a resident, permanent resident owner in any zone in the city. So if you own a house and you live there for more than 270, I think it's 78 days a year, and you can show that you are registered to vote there, you have a vehicle registered there. If you can provide all that documentation, any zone in the city, we permit short-term rental in. What you cannot do is buy a second property and rent it out as just an income property. So there's no restriction in any zone for someone like me to rent my house if I go out of town for 3 weeks. That was
Steve,
changed.
You gotta come to you have to make an application for a short-term rental permit. You can't simply do it on your own.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is, like, in any zone in the city, you can make an application as long as you're an owner occupant. So it sounded like earlier the discussion was that was not the case, but it is. You just have to secure a permit. And there's specific criteria that you have to provide in order to get that permit.
And so you can rent from the 365 to the 278, is that what we're saying?
backwards.
Could you repeat that?
Yes.
Yes,
Could you, I couldn't hear what you said.
so you said that as long as you live in your house for at least 278 days, so I'm assuming you could rent from 278 to 365.
Yeah, that's correct. We allow, essentially, it's like a 3-month. We essentially allow a 3-month period where someone could rent their house out.
Okay.
But if you're not, you still have to comply with all the, the short-term rental obligations. You have to have insurance, you have to have the inspections, you have to have, if you're not in town and not living in your own house, you still have to have a representative who can be contacted by code. You have to have a registered representative. If you have a shared driveway, you have to have permission from the person that you're sharing the driveway with, if they have no objection. You have to conform to all the permit requirements of any other person who has a short-term rental permit. You can't simply do it on your own. say, sure, you can live here for 3 months as short-term rental.
That's correct.
Right.
And also, if it's in an R2 zone, you have to provide evidence that that is in fact your legal residence.
For an R2, you have to prove that that's your residence, is that what you just said?
Yeah, you have to show that your vehicle's registered there, that you receive mail there. There's a whole list. There's a list of items you have to provide.
Okay.
So Steve, thank you for the clarification on that. And then moving on to the question about the U zone.
So the U zone was brought up because Hartwick was given a use variance that allows them to do short-term rental. SUNY Oneonta falls outside most of our jurisdictional authority to regulate what they do on their campus. So basically our two largest portions of land already have some sort of either short-term rental ability or are simply not under our, we just don't have jurisdictional authority over them. With that said, there's a handful of houses that border Hartwick's property that are zoned U. And then we also have, and this is kind of what goes back to the original topic about the R3. We have one property, one section of R3 that kind of is an island. It butts up against the U zone. It butts up against an R1. And then it butts up against land that SUNY Oneonta owns. It's directly across the street from SUNY Oneonta. That land happens to be in the town, which is why it's not zoned U. The idea would be that we would allow short-term rental in the U zone because effectively it already is permitted in essentially is permitted in the U zone. And we would include that parcel instead of being an R3, which is a high density parcel, we would change that to U because it would mirror the existing land uses adjacent to it.
Questions for me?
So.
Because if we look at the, if we look,
I don't understand, why can't we just do Hilltop and not the rest of them?
It's, if you, do you have the, you don't have the map in front of you. The R3 zone that includes Hillside Commons also includes the apartment complex there, and it might include 1 or 2 houses too. So we would change that entire zone. I don't know, unless you split it up,
I guess I can't keep one R3.
but I think going into spot zone though is what is the problem.
can't spot zone.
Oh, that's all spot, okay. I gotcha.
yeah, I mean,
And so would this have an effect on the pilot that the Hillside Commons they could just sign? Well, weren't they restricted not to be able to use any of their land except for what they developed out? So would that change their ability? Would they be able to utilize the rest of that acreage that they own? Is that what they're trying to do, or?
I don't know, and I don't know that I can speak to that. I don't know, and I don't know if their pilot program is over. I thought that was for 20 years. Is it? But something. 60? 50? Oh, that's all right.
Oh, it's 15. I just remember something, I never saw the diagram, I just remember there was something about they were restricted not to be able to develop or utilize any of that other acreage that they own. So,
That's a good question. If you change it to U, if that would change that, I mean, I would think it wouldn't, but I can't say for sure.
right.
I would assume that that agreement was built into the, I mean, would it have built? You know, I don't know, I just, I don't know the answer to that.
It would stand to reason that it would not, but we don't have the document.
Does the guy behind you have any thoughts on it?
I simply don't know, we'd have to look at it, but I think the desire was not to build something additional, it was simply to use the.
That's
utilize it in the summertime,
Yes, that's absolutely right.
but we can take a look at it and see the thing.
As even if they decided they wanted to build, I mean, they would still have to go through the same mechanisms that.
We have to go through secret, have to go through.
Yeah.
Steve, anything to Oh, Mark, I'm sorry, I see.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to understand a little bit more, do we give up our ability to regulate if we move into a U zone? What's the potential impact on a U zone? Understand?
Yeah, no, I mean, so the U zone is a zoning district in the city of Oneonta. The campuses were all zoned U, both SUNY and Hartwick. SUNY, because it's a state, it's a state facility, we don't really have a lot of control over what they do on their property, but we do on
We
Hartwick's.
have no authority to do anything.
Well, yeah, we do not regulate SUNY Oneonta's campus. They send us, if they do work there, they're required to notify us through seeker. But we're not regulating their zoning processes. Hartwick was given a zoning variance to do short-term rental on most of their campus. So Hartwick is already doing short-term rental in that portion of the U zone. So essentially what we have is two major parcel holders in the U zone, essentially engaging in short-term rental. There's a handful of properties that abut Hartwick that are not allowed to do short-term rental because they're not owned by Hartwick, but they're in the U zone. Hillside Commons and the parcels around Hillside Commons are directly adjacent to the campus. We zoned those R3, despite there being no contiguous R3 zones and no plans to build, high density housing there. It was just kind of essentially was zoned that way because it was kind of what was there. So it would make more sense to me to just include them into that U zone because it's already contiguous to the university. But no, we don't lose any authority to zone or regulate privately owned property. We just can't do it with state property.
Thank you.
And sorry to throw this out there, but I mean, and this is the dilemma I have. I can keep going back and forth with this. If the whole point of this discussion is R3 versus U, just because of apartment complexes, and we don't know, or I don't know what the effect it's going to have on apartment complexes. And if we're leaning toward changing that R3 zone to a U to get out of this dilemma, but we're essentially turning an apartment complex into the U zone, which will then allow them to do short-term rentals. It's like, I don't know if that's really taking care of that question of how is that going to impact an apartment complex that caters to people year-round. So I don't know. I don't know that that's necessarily the
Steve, can you address that?
What?
Can you
I mean,
the question I have is if we're deciding, if we're going from an R3, saying yes, we're going to do short-term rentals in R3 zones, but then the concern is what happens with an apartment complex that caters to people 12 months out of the year. So then that's not to impact that, we change the one R3 zone to a U zone. So Hillside Commons would be able to then do short-term rentals. It would still affect an apartment complex. So it's not really solving that dilemma. So I don't know what I'm asking you though, Stephen. I'm just pointing this out that it's really not, it seems like it's solving that question, but it's really not. So it would bring me back to then.
So Steve, is that an accurate representation of the issue?
Right.
yeah, I mean, I think that all communities are trying to deal with how do we address short-term rentals and how do we kind of regulate them in relation to full-time or non-tourist rentals. I mean, my interest, I think my interest in this particular zoning change would be just cleaning up the zoning map a little bit. Just simply because having that area zoned R3 doesn't really match the map. I mean, it doesn't really match the uses that are adjacent to the property. And it was kind of just arbitrarily zoned R3 because there was an apartment complex there. I think that alleviating some of the demand for short-term rental in Center City would be somewhat addressed here potentially. Because I think we kind of have a situation where some of our higher density neighborhoods that are in Center City are being kind of utilized for short-term rental. And there's a lot of pressure there, which pushes people out of those properties as well. So, I mean, it's kind of, you know, it's kind of 6 to 1, half dozen the other. It's happening all through the city.
There was one piece, Stephen, that we talked about that I completely forgot about until just now. And it's, if Hillside Commons, let's say Hillside Commons wants to do short-term rentals, they can come to the ZBA and apply for a variance, correct?
That was my question.
Yeah, I mean, you can always apply for a zoning. You can always apply for a zoning variance.
So have they, or is this
anyone
just
can
something that you're looking at trying to get?
No.
They have not applied for zoning variance.
This is just something coming from your desk. You want to get this cleaned up because you've identified it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this makes sense. I think we have a lot of R3 zones that need to be up and kind of rezoned. And I think it's part of a larger review of some of our zoning districts so that we can kind of address how the map was drawn, because we have R3 zones that are kind of, I hate to use the word arbitrarily, but we have R3 zones kind of scattered haphazardly throughout the city, including one in the 6th ward that is kind of just there in the middle of space. So I don't think it's a bad idea to start kind of finding ways to narrow down the zoning and kind of make a little more sense with what's kind of going on with the land uses around these parcels. So yeah, I mean, I see more of that, but yeah, no, they can apply for a zoning variance. You can always apply for a zoning variance. The legalities, like the legal issues that come up if you grant zoning variances, that can be tricky. So, but yeah, anyone can apply.
Right, so Steve, you brought this forward with a recommendation that in your opinion, that this being zoned to you makes some sort of sense relative to a larger vision of our zoning map that will be addressing in the future, correct?
Yeah, I think it's much more rational to say that a property adjacent to a university, essentially an apartment complex that serves as student housing for that university, to match the types of uses that are going on around it, instead of zone for, I mean, right now it's just zoned as a generic, like you could build 4 more apartment complexes up there if you wanted to. I mean, it's currently zoned essentially as high density housing, which, you know, I mean, it's kind of, it seems to me odd that we would have that zone as an R3 and not as a U, because the same types of uses go on in U's that go on in R3s. There's a couple caveats there, but for the most part, the uses are similar, and it doesn't make sense to have that zoned as an R3 and not a U, which is what's adjacent to it.
Thank you, Steve. Mark.
Yeah, so Stephen, using that logic, I mean, we have several R3 zones that are adjacent to U zones. It seems like those R3 zones are covering some of our kind of a high density kind of apartment buildings. I mean, do we begin to go down a path where we move one R3 to U that we would then begin moving other R3s? At my count of it, we have 2 more R3s that are adjacent to U zones right now in the city.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess where I'm seeing is, I think some of those other R3s could be zoned into other neighborhoods. I think that some of the neighborhoods we have that are lower density zoned, and some of them that are higher could be made into one zone. Like, I think that's part of a broader rezoning process.
So Stephen,
Does-
given what we went through last year with the U zone for Harvard College, and then the multi-month process of going in there for the solar array, is that then that property owner, Hillside Commons, would be eligible because they're in a U zone, then they could put up a solar array on their property. Is that correct?
They could theoretically utilize that property for like accessory uses to the college, which is essentially it's already being used for.
Right. No, I definitely agree with what you're saying, is that it's students that are renting that facility and it's adjacent to the university. It's just that also we learned that with that U zone, they could pretty much build whatever Harper College wanted right up against the residentials. Do we offer some kind of a buffer then? Can we offer a buffer?
Yeah, I mean, we could change the shape of the zone. I mean, you can, I mean, we could rework some of the uses that are allowed in the U zone, or we could tweak how the U zone's designed.
Yeah, because I just know that the folks that were up on Suncrest Terrace, that was one of their biggest concerns. They didn't understand until it started happening to them that literally that property owner could build a 10-story building right next door to them.
Yes, that's correct.
So Stephen, reworking some of the uses of the U zone might address a few of the issues and concerns that have been brought up.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's part of, I think that part of this is just part of a broader discussion about how our zoning is mapped and some of the uses that we permit, as well as some of how those boundaries were drawn. Because if we look in neighborhoods, we have, I think you would find some higher density housing is in Center City than you do, you know, in areas that we zone as higher density housing. So I think this is part of kind of working through, you know, a broader zoning discussion.
And then ultimately, is this something that you're having a conversation with ZBA and planning also, or?
Yeah, we've discussed this with the planning commission. I mean, the zoning board of appeals is an appeals board, so they're not charged in the charter is, you know, really developing zoning. I mean, that's the function of the planning commission.
You
But
said,
yeah, we've just
okay,
and that's, you know, the MU1 code came out of that. You know, that was our first kind of move towards rezoning some parts of the city. But yeah, I think there's areas we could clean up.
All right, thank you very much, Steve. So, council. Thoughts, direction here? We're looking at Stephen potentially offering some options around cleaning up the U zone itself relative to some of the concerns that have been expressed here. Is that something that there's a long time frame on?
No, we could I mean, the U zone, because it's so small, is one of the easier zones to address. So I mean, I think we could probably have something put together in a month.
Terrific. So we might have something to look at. Mark, do you have something?
No, I was just gonna say, I still feel like, I mean, I would appreciate seeing kind of rework the use zone, but I've got a lot of questions still left uninformed, if that makes any sense. Just trying to understand would there be any negative impact on folks. I mean, I understand very much the logic that Steve was presenting, and I appreciate the logic. Just trying to look for a downside that might impact folks unintentionally.
Sure. Sure, Dave.
Yeah, I would agree. I appreciate all the work that Steven's done. I just don't want to, looking at the housing issues we have, I don't want to accidentally do something that reduces our available housing for people for
Well, certainly year round, right, living, right, so I think we're all on the same page there. Go ahead. Mark.
Yeah, I would say just another, I think more time to think about this and maybe another conversation would be helpful as we kind of get a little better understand these use zones. At least.
So then, I appreciate that. Then can we do this, Steve? Can we ask that maybe we take a look at whatever modifications to the U zone that you think might be reflective of some of the concerns that were voiced here, and maybe looking at that particular map of the R3, specific to where Los Commons is, we might be able to kind of extrapolate the potential impact on, some of the other buildings around, and maybe have that conversation at our next meeting of the council.
Yeah.
In 2 weeks that's our budget, that's the 29th. We could.
I don't think there's a rush on that stuff either. I don't think there's a rush on this either, but we could push this off till it's just something over.
Even if identified.
Yeah, okay. So we look to the 6th of December. That seemed like a reasonable period of time for you, Stephen?
Yeah, I think that's approximately a month, right? Isn't that what we?
Yeah, approximately.
And not to jump too far here, you were discussing the tree ordinance or tree protection. Mark.
Yep.
Not Mark Drenick, Mark Davies. So our MU1 code actually has that written into it. So the downtown code now has an entire section written into requirements if you're going to remove a tree, what types of trees you can plant, the location of trees. There's an entire section of the downtown code dedicated to tree management, I guess.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. Again, I think that there was some language they wanted to add and to codify some particular ideas, but again, I'm speaking for them, and I certainly will let them speak to you and then present us with whatever it is. But they did acknowledge that there is quite a bit in our codes right now that address trees. They just wanted to pull together some other pieces as well.
Okay.
Very good. So I think we're fairly well figured out in terms of this item for discussion. Thank you very much, Steve. And we'll wait for and we could potentially actually have a motion and discussion on the U zone, even as we have the conversation around that with Stephen on the 6th. Even where we're just able to deciding that it wasn't enough yet to make us comfortable moving forward.
So, Stephen, you still there?
Yep.
So just really quickly, I'm sorry to go back to this. So we actually create the descriptions of these zones, I mean, we can kind of decide what's within, these are kind of state designated zones.
No, yeah, so I mean, when we write zoning, like the downtown zoning ordinance was like developed through the planning commission and myself. I mean, we are the captain of the ship on zoning. It's entirely local.
Okay.
The only thing that essentially zoning, you just have to have a rational reason for why you're doing it. So the reason that I think the R3 zone doesn't make sense for that location is these R3 zones kind of exist is like little islands in the middle of the zoning map. They don't really connect to kind of like a broader zoning like vision. They're just kind of like these little islands that we kind of threw throughout the zoning map. So the idea would be is we could rationalize this being a U zone much easier than you can rationalize it being a high density like zoning parcel that just kind of exists in, kind of in limbo. But yeah, so long story short, yeah, we develop the zoning, we oversee the zoning, we can put whatever we want in the zoning within reason.
Subject to secret, I mean, we still have to go through the entire secret process. Anytime we change the zone, there has to be a secret review of the impact of the zone on the environment, which includes obviously both the space and everything around us.
Does that take into consideration economic impacts or is it only environmental?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Was that?
I think it's environmental.
No, I was just thinking about the unintended.
Well, environmental or economic impacts almost always have or environmental addressing an environmental issue almost always has economic impact because you're either limiting or authorizing specific activities. And you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's sort of integral.
No, I was just wondering, again, thinking about the other unintended outcome of the other, apartment zone that's right next to the hillside commons, would it take into consideration what might be the impact of the legislation? But it's something it's not, it's only.
It's not gonna look at the economic impact on another neighboring business.
Right. But thank you.
All right, so we'll move on then to number 11, general item for discussion, motion that the common council approves the 2023 tentative budget as presented for a public hearing to be scheduled for November 29th, 2022. Do I have a motion to approve? And followed by Mark. And discussion.
So the email that was sent out by the city administrator this afternoon, would have a direct impact towards the county's budget, or is there some wiggle room within that?
I'm sorry, which email are you referring to, about
The administrative salaries.
that's included, what I outlined there, explained there was included in the tentative budget.
So if we were to look at increasing or decreasing, it would have a direct impact on the tentative budget. Right. I would like to talk about at least one particular employee that was listed on the administrative salary schedule. And so I think that would require going into executive session.
Okay, we can call for executive session.
Just for clarification, you're talking about the person, not the position.
The person.
Okay, so if you're talking about the position, then we don't go to executive session.
Right.
Talk about a person, then we go to
Person, so Len followed by Katie. And then in favor,
Councilmember Murphy,
Sorry, aye.
Councilmember Davis.
Yes.
Councilmember Ripper,
Yes.
Councilmember Carter. Aye. Councilmember Carter.
Yes.
Councilmember Buckland.
Hi.
Harry, would it be easier if I called somebody's cell phone?
That's exactly what I was just gonna ask.
Yeah, I'll give Dave Risberger a call if that works for you, Dave.
I don't have my phone.
Okay, I will give anybody, whoever
Mark
calls,
Davies.
okay, I'll give it a call, Mark. I'll hang up with you. Take care. Okay, you too.
Okay, we're back. And we've a motion. Thank you very much. Okay. And we have motion that the common council amends the 2023 tentative budget as follows: increase A.1410.1 personal services by $3,000. Increase A.1410.8 retirement by $450. Increase A.1410.81 Social Security and Medicare by $250. Reduce A.1990.480 contingency by $3,700. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
So moved.
By Katie, followed by Glenn, and further discussion? With no discussion, we'll call the vote.
Councilmember Murphy,
Aye.
Councilmember Davies.
Yes.
Councilmember Risberger,
Yes.
Councilmember LaFarge. Aye. Councilmember President,
Yes.
Councilmember Flowers.
Aye.
All right. And, right, I got this. All right, so thank you. So, motion number 11, we're gonna go back to that the common council approves the 2023 amended tentative budget as presented for a public hearing to be scheduled on November 29th, 2022. Do I have a motion to approve? And followed by
I'll second.
Luke. All right. All right, very good. And discussion? No discussion? Do we,
Councilmember Murphy.
Aye.
Councilmember Davies.
Yes.
Councilmember Risberger,
Yes.
Councilmember LaFarge. Aye. Councilmember Person,
Yes.
Councilmember Butler.
all right, very good. That passes. And we're, before we move into correspondence, we have an additional motion, supplemental agenda, you'll see, motion number 12, that the common council, maybe 13 now. That the common council authorizes the mayor to sign 2023 insurance renewals with Excelis, Blue Cross Blue Shield for medical and dental coverage as presented. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Followed by second, Katie. And we have discussion. And with no discussion, we'll take a vote.
Councilmember Murphy,
Aye.
Councilmember Davies.
Yes.
Councilmember Risberger,
Yes.
Councilmember LaFarge. Aye. Councilmember Person,
Yes.
Councilmember Butler.
Aye.
All right. Under additional business, we have a 30-day advance notice form received for new application for a liquor license for Asian Cuisine and Bar to be located at 148 Main Street, also 16 Water Street, it's the up and down, which will allow for the service of liquor, wine, beer, and cider. And this is for discussion. Anybody have any issues with this at all? Is this for us to waive our 30 days on this? It is. And we have a Len.
I just had a question for Steve Maryland.
Steve, you still there?
So Steve, have you had any negative interaction with this business since they've been around?
Actually, this individual, this business is associated with Tokyo Tavern. We got a call about some signage and there was some confusion about what he needed to file, but he has a fire certificate. I mean, as far as we're concerned, he's good to go.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so we have a general consensus among council, do it? That we can waive our 30-day option on this and let the SLA proceed. So that's terrific, great. And then with that, we'll look to correspondence. Do we have any? We have no correspondence. Is there any need for yet another executive session? Sure,
No, but I had some additional business.
very good.
I just wanted to take a second and congratulate our fellow council member, Emily Falco, who won her election in a landslide. Confident that you will be able to fill that for the rest of the term, and it's great to have you.
Thank you.
Very good to meet you.
You only have our 8th ward representative get 30 to look for you.
Any other council discussion? All right, with that and no executive session is needed, I'm going to say unless there's objection. Adjourned.
Have a good one, everybody.